The paradox of creation. I hope you felt blessed, as I did, in hearing this wide variety of people from our congregation read from this first chapter of Genesis and sharing with us the creation story and the poetry that emerges out of this very beginning of our Bible. It helps so much hearing all these different voices with lots of different backgrounds and a reminder of the true miraculous nature of this paradox of God's creation. The reminder, too, that this creation culminates with these words, and God created them, male and female. In the image of God, God created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and care for it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living creature, every living thing that moves upon the earth. The paradox of God's creation, the culmination of these 6 days, God proclaiming with each category of creation, after each what is called day in the poetic words, God proclaims it is good. It is a verbal blessing that then culminates in day 6 with this blessing that says, not only is it good, but now it is very good. That every aspect of the created order God gives a blessing to, and the final blessing with men and women, which, by the way, fascinatingly are created equally and simultaneously in this first chapter. There is no ethnicity given. It is not designated in any way that it is Jewish people that are the subjects of this creation, or white people or black people or any kind of racial designation. It is humanity. It is the human race that is blessed as a part of God's created order. And it is all of us, the human race, that is given this very important imperative to care for the earth, to have dominion, which, as we will talk about further in a moment, it's simply this very important task of caring for the earth as God cares for the earth, as we see in Jesus, the concern for every person and God's concern for every living creature. So to have dominion is to provide care and to be stewards of God's good creation. The paradox of creation that we want to uncover further is this miraculous experience of creation coming into being. And I want to read words for you from Love and Quasars, the author of whom you know very well. And hear these words from page 80 in Love and Quasars. This long unfurling of light, matter, and life could not have happened if a separate set of unlikely things had not been true. For example, if the universe did not contain 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, or if the cosmic mass energy density were not balanced on a knife edge called omega equals 1, or if the rate at which stars fuse hydrogen into helium were not precisely as it is, or if the relative strengths of the electromagnetic gravitational forces did not equal approximately 1 with 36 zeros afterwards, or in scientific terms, 10 to the 36th power, we could not be here to talk about it. There are more requirements, but these are sufficient to make my point. The world is a miracle, as we are in it. The author of those great words is our own Paul Wallace, and I'm thrilled to have Paul with me today, my friend, my colleague, and our pastor for adult education. And Paul, I'm so grateful for your being here today, and I look forward to our sharing in talking about both the miracle of God's creation and the paradox of God's creation and what our responsibility in it is now. I'm so thankful to have Paul Wallace with me today, my friend, my colleague, and our pastor for adult education. And Paul, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your wisdom And I want to give a quick shout out for your two books, one of which I just read from, the Love and Quasars, but also The Stars Beneath Us. Both just fantastic examples of your scholarship and your faith. And so I
Thank
just
you, David.
really appreciate your ability to talk openly, confessionally, transparently about how valuable, how vital faith is for you, and how that is for you also woven into your academia, your intellect, and your science background, physics, astrophysics. We've been discussing the first chapter of Genesis, and we're blessed earlier by a whole host of our church members reading different snippets from that creation story, that poem that emerges out of the earliest parts of Israel's history. So share a little bit about your take on this, Paul. I feel like you, in both books, you write extensively about, I think you use the word, the knife edge of our existence, the wonder, the awe that we really ought to have with our being here as a part of God's gift. So talk a little bit about your perspective on faith, on science, on this creation story as we start.
Well, this is obviously the biggest, when people think of creation in the Bible, this is the they think of, and rightfully so. It's right up front. And it tells a lovely story, and it tells the story in a very organized way. The first chapter of Genesis is probably the most highly structured chapter of any chapter in the Bible. I could go on with that, but what I want to say is that that's not by accident. That's on purpose. The idea is that the high structure and the orderly progression of Genesis 1 reveals the structure and the order that's found in creation itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the title of our theme for today is the paradox of creation. And so one of the things that I pointed out in the introduction, and is very clear as the different categories of creation, as we sometimes can call them, the days of creation or the categories of creation, each one concludes with, and it is good. Mm-hmm. And it is good, until the sixth day, which then becomes the culmination with the man and the woman being created, and it is now very good. The paradox
Isn't that something?
Yeah. The paradox being, of course, is that there is this sense of wonder and awe, there's this miracle. And yet there is also, as you've pointed out frequently, COVID-19. There is tension between people who right now, I mean, we're painfully aware of what's happening in our country and around the world, of the stresses and the fault lines of people needing to be heard, wanting to be understood, of others resisting that. So talk a little more about this paradox.
Sure.
The goodness and the not so goodness.
Well, it's interesting because when it says that creation is good, I'm not sure that means that creation is perfect in the sense that we normally think of perfect as being completely pain-free and completely trouble-free. Mm-hmm. I think that it's really interesting that if you go on, I don't want to get ahead of, we go on into chapter 2 of Genesis, we see that there is literally a snake in the grass. That there's something that is a little bit twisted, a little bit wrong is maybe too hard of a word to say, too harsh of a word, but there's something that is a little bit dangerous.
Right. Yeah.
That is part of creation. And I think that runs not only through the non-human part of creation, things like the virus, but also, I mean, we are part of creation. We don't stand above it. We are part of it. And we carry some of that within ourselves, some of that snake in the grass, it's within each of us as well.
Which we can call legitimately the human condition.
Right.
Meaning there is both the tremendous potential for good and the scary potential for foolishness and
Right.
selfishness and self-centeredness and bad choices, bad decisions, bias, prejudice. I mean, all the things that we know we stumble into from time to time. But I'm glad you brought in the flow, because here we have this opening poem that is so beautiful and so incredibly structured. And it sort of gracefully moves into this more earthy vision where we have a second creation story
Right.
where now it's this being that's formed out of the dust of the earth, which I've referred to before. I know you have too, where clearly the language illustrates that we are both highly spiritual. God blows the ruach into us, and we're created out of earthiness and dirt, and which I think is perfectly illustrative of what follows. You've got people trying to do the right thing, but stumbling into foolishness, and then other times intentionally doing selfish and bad things. So I love the way the Bible, I think, brilliantly gives us this wonder and this tension that will continue on. We'll say a little more about your study and especially with love and quasars. I feel like that is such a good testimony to the vitality of really being forthright and courageous in scientific inquiry, and having this genuine sense of awe in God's handiwork.
Well, it's that genuine sense of awe. If you asked any scientist whatsoever, about how they got into science, you will hear every time a story of wonder or of awe. You will hear that, because that is what motivates every scientist ultimately, is just an absolute curiosity and just, again, the word wonder at creation, at some aspect of creation, at the whole thing, whatever. Wonder drives science. That's really what's at the heart of it.
Yeah.
Without wonder, without that sense of awe, that sense of just absolutely driven curiosity, you wouldn't have science whatsoever.
Right, right. Which interestingly also connects with, in the third chapter, you have the man and the woman who begin to investigate. They're inquisitive, and it gets them in trouble. So
yes, it does.
The curiosity, I mean, it's like this gift we're given, but there is that element of danger.
There is.
With the curiosity.
And for thousands of years, curiosity was not a virtue. I mean, that's only been really since the scientific revolution that curiosity has been considered a virtue.
Do what your forebears have done. Stick with the program.
Right.
Don't vary from what's been. And I think that's something that we're still trying to come to terms with in our age, of how far do you push this? How much do you trust science? And inquiry, and really looking for accurate information that will provide a sense of groundedness and wisdom. So that's there are all these fault lines, and I think the Bible takes these seriously and is in many ways sort of setting the stage for our interpretation of life and faith, in the recognition that while this creation we share is indeed beautiful, there is the paradoxical nature where we have to take some significant responsibility in being stewards of what God hands us.
Yes.
So that lends us now to the conclusion, or as we move into and through the sixth day, God proclaims it very good. Prior to that, God blesses the woman and the man, and then gives them this imperative to be fruitful and multiply, to care for the earth, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all living things. And so this brings us now to our current moment. And I want us to take seriously how this really translates through the New Testament and through the lens of Jesus into our present time. And I think you do some of this in both of your books, but I know also you do it on a weekly basis on your Wednesday night Bible studies, which I want to give you a shout out for. And we do this pretty regularly in our Sunday school classes, which you help to facilitate and oversee. And that is the translation of the richness and the poetic nature of, say, chapter 1 of Genesis, and then moving forward, and what we see in the New Testament in Jesus, and the calling to take seriously this responsibility for creation and for one another. So let's talk as we sort of move towards a conclusion here about your feelings and our struggles together as a church family and as a church staff and as a community, our corporate responsibility for one another, including our broader community of people who have suffered greatly from discrimination, folks who are struggling right now to let their voices be heard. How do you see that as a part of this whole movement, biblical and otherwise, in our interpretation as Christians of what we're to do now?
Well, I see it as connecting it back to creation. When we tend to think, I really believe that one thing that creates a lot of trouble with us is to see ourselves as there's humans, there's us, and then there's creation, and they're separate.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not. But they're not separate.
Yeah.
We are indeed embedded in creation and are told to take care of creation, and that includes one another.
Well, Paul, speaking of caring for each other, there is this continued trajectory in this early part of Genesis from the beauty of the creation poem through the more earthy description of the being emerging out of the dust of the earth, then the story of the man and the woman in the garden. In the 4th chapter, there is this Cain and Abel story, which to me really powerfully illustrates the tension between different groups of people, different perspectives on life. And there is this poignant question that Cain throws out, am I my brother's keeper? After his murder of Abel, am I my brother's keeper? And the clear answer that is woven into that is, yes, you are. You are.
And that's always the answer.
Yeah. And to me, it's a powerful, I mean, it's also kind of poetic in the way that it just leaves a lot of stuff dangling, I think brilliantly, in the sense that that's the way life works out a lot of times, without clean answers, with a lot of dangling questions, like what we're experiencing now. What's the right way of proceeding? How should white people interact with the real clear concerns emerging out of the African American community? And is this something that, are we our brothers and sisters keeper, or should we just sort of let this sort of unfold? And I think this is the constant tension. And sadly, the church over the centuries too often has not taken seriously that implied answer. And then certainly the example of Jesus in the New Testament, where Jesus over and over again says, you are indeed your brothers and your sisters keeper. So I feel like this, the curiosity, the responsibility, the imperative of care and compassion is just so central to the way the Bible starts and the way the Bible continues, ultimately and perfectly as shown in the way Jesus lives that out. So I appreciate so much your scientific approach that blossoms into this faithful rendition of following Jesus, taking the Bible seriously, helping all of us really wrestle with our faith, and yet seeing with open eyes and open hearts the value of science the importance of intellect, the real call for inquiry, the blessing of curiosity. And so I'm grateful to you for living that out and demonstrating that through your words and your actions and your excellent books, which I keep throwing out there for folks. So I hope you get some good response
Thank you, David.
of people buying them. But I also want to say what a pleasure it is to be your colleague, your partner in ministry, and how I truly enjoy being able to have our staff and our church as a place where together we wrestle with these very important issues.
Thank you for the good word, David.
Yes, and what a gift it is to share in this with you, Paul. I did
Thanks.
share with many of you, and Paul, and I want to echo this, that following our worship service today, taking seriously where we are, not only in the COVID-19 crisis, but especially right now in the life of our country, I'm going to be having a conversation following our benediction with Chief of Police Mike Booker. And Paul is aware the great value that Mike has been to our community and the many ways that all of us appreciate his particular perspective and openness and confessional stance on the need for police across the country to take seriously not only the role of providing safety, but now Mike is involved in what's called the Trust Initiative, where police departments across the country are confessing to terrible things that have happened in the past, where they are owning up to things that they need to speak the truth about. So I encourage you to join me and Mike following our worship service after the benediction to hear his very important and powerful words for us. Paul, thank you for your wisdom, for your gifts to our congregation. And brothers and sisters, may you see the richness of the scripture. May you feel the depth and breadth of our faith. And with the kind of curiosity and intellect that Paul exhibits, may you also investigate what it is that God is calling for you and me to do today and in our lives together. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Amen.